Okay, I think it's time for us to begin. Naveed, give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, great. So evening, everybody. Welcome to all. Welcome to Results UK's February Grassroots Conference call, the second of this year. So we're getting into 2021. I hope that you're all still managing to stay safe and well during the extended lockdown period. And for those that don't know me, haven't had a chance to meet me yet, my name's Aaron Oxley. I'm the Executive Director of Results UK. And if we have anybody who's new to Results on the call this month, very special welcome to you. Thanks for joining us tonight. Please feel free to pop off mute and introduce yourself, or alternatively, you can introduce yourself using the chat function, maybe say where you are in the country. Of course, it's not compulsory, but if you want to say hi, we're very pleased to welcome you.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Sorry my video's not on, but I'm new and I'm based in Manchester.
Rachel, lovely to have you. Manchester, lovely town. I've been there a couple of times. Always a nice trip.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to say hi?
I'll say hi. This is Pete, Stork Valley.
Hi, Pete.
I switched off my picture because I'm eating a vegetable samosa and having a coffee at the same time. I'm embarrassed to be seen chewing in front of all these lovely people.
Welcome, Peter, for the 300th or 400th time. Glad to have you.
Hello, we're Bill and Rosemary from Macclesfield.
Lovely to
Macclesfield.
Oldest results group in the country, I think, is Macclesfield. It's where Results got its start 34-ish years ago. So
it all happened there.
It all happened. So we're really glad to have you. Very good.
There's Jill. Hello, Jill.
Any other new folks, or should we get on? Should we jump into the call?
Oh, hi, I'm Candy. I'm speaking from Birmingham.
Hi, Candy. Lovely to have you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I'm also speaking from Birmingham.
Oh, great. Excellent. Carrie, have you been doing some recruiting or?
I can't possibly say.
Okay, well done. Lovely to have both of you, Rebecca and Candy. Last call, any more? Okay, if you are new and you didn't say hi, welcome to you anyway. We're really pleased to have you, and of course, really good to see some new faces on the call. Now, particularly for the new folks, but just a reminder for everybody, a little bit of housekeeping. For new people, just to let you know, we do record these calls so that people that can't make the call this evening can catch up later, have a listen. It's usually posted on the blog section of our website within a few days of the call. And if we share any resources like articles or links, we include those in the description. So you don't need to frantically cut and paste and scribble everything down right now. You should be able to get back to that. If you're not so happy to be included in the video, then do feel free to turn your video off. Although, of course, we do like to see folks' faces if possible. As I mentioned earlier, keep yourself muted during the call. It really ensures the best call quality for everybody else. And if we spot some noise coming from your line and you can't get to the mute button, I'll ask our coordinators to do that for you. And you'll just have to remember to unmute yourself if you want to speak. One other thing about this call is that we do keep the chat function on right throughout, so do feel free to ask questions, put comments into the chat at any time. The people that are speaking won't be distracted by that, or at least shouldn't be. So please go for your life there. Right, so let's kick into the subject of tonight's call. It's a really important one, actually, and one of the most important calls I think we've ever had. So as we first alerted you to back in late November last year, we were actually very concerned about the impact of the government's proposed cuts to UK aid spending. To put that in perspective, our latest calculation sits that at around £5 billion per year, which would be a colossal cut, around 30%. So pretty serious stuff. So this month, we're asking you to take action on this if you haven't already. Or if you have, to consider whether there's anything more you can do to raise this with your MP or via the media or through your social media channels, or to ask family and friends to take action. It's really quite an important time. Later on in the call, we'll be describing some of the support there is to help you do this, both from Results, but also from the broader Aid Coalition. That's a group of international development agencies who for some time now have been coordinating our work to defend UK aid. And of course, we're coming together on this because we know just how important it is collectively for fighting poverty around the world and for saving lives. Now, I'm not going to speak in detail about the impact of the proposed aid cuts and the implications of that. We've got a very special expert guest speaker this month who's going to be able to answer all your questions around what the cuts could mean for our international development programming. But I'll say just a bit about what we know or suspect at present and what we're particularly concerned about at results, given that we don't focus on the whole of the aid budget, we focus on a number of specific issues. So first, in the action materials we emailed you on Friday, we said that we believe that a parliamentary vote on the aid cuts could be announced at any time, but we're now hearing rumours that it might not be until April. The situation seems pretty fluid and nothing is for sure. The government doesn't have to give much notice of when it will be, when the vote will be, or what the procedure is. And so we can't really tell you anymore at this stage. And it's not because we don't know, it's because no one knows. We will keep you informed as soon as we find out more. So do keep an eye on your email inboxes. For those of you that are new to this issue, the reason there has to be a vote and why the government can't just cut the aid budget as it likes is because the UK's obligation to spend 0.7% of our national income on aid is enshrined in law. In an act called the International Development Official Development Assistance Target Act 2015. I'll paste that in the chat box in a minute if anybody does want to write it down. This is a bit of a mouthful, but if you've ever heard anybody speaking about the 0.7% Act or the 0.7% law, this is actually what they're referring to. And so what the 0.7% Act does is it basically requires the government spending on aid in any given year to reach 0.7% of gross national income, sometimes shortened to GNI. Now, if it hasn't been reached for whatever reason, the Secretary of State has to inform Parliament of the fact that it hasn't, explain why, and say what the government is going to do to meet the target in the future. But what the government can't do is deliberately plan to break the law by not meeting the 0.7% target. So that's why the Foreign Secretary announced in December that they intend to repeal the 0.7% Act. Now, getting that law passed in 2015 was a huge victory for campaigners. And I know that a few of you on this call tonight played a big part in that success. It was hugely important because it took the politics out of aid spending, and it meant that our already well-respected Department for International Development can concentrate even further on delivering value for money through the best programming. Importantly, for a few years, there was a strong cross-party consensus that the UK should spend this small fraction of our income on helping countries develop their health and education systems, develop economically, become more resilient and self-sufficient, as well as providing help to deal with the consequences of humanitarian emergencies if and as the needs arose. However, in the last couple of years, this consensus has broken down. And with the addition of the COVID-19 pandemic, this government has now taken the decision to abandon this commitment, citing economic reasons. As I said, our discussion later will be an opportunity to delve into this a lot more deeply with a real technical expert. Now, this is a somewhat technical side of international development, and it can't be overstated that as campaigners, we don't all have to be experts on aid. But in a democracy, people quite rightly question government decisions and put forward alternative proposals for how to achieve the goals that we want to reach within the finite resources that we have, but especially at a time of extreme challenge such as the current pandemic. So that's what we're about here, arguing our case for a continuance of aid spending because we know that ongoing inequality, disease, and a lack of opportunities is a moral blight, as well as being bad for everybody on the planet. You show your concern for this by the campaign actions you take, and in fact, by just being here this evening and wanting to learn more. For everything you can do and have done already to raise your concern about the importance of UK aid, a really big thank you. I know that some of you raised this back in December when the proposal to reduce aid spending to 0.5% of our national income had just been announced, on top of cuts that were announced earlier in 2020 that were to do with the shrinking economy. So this is going to be a bit of a long haul, but we don't need to wait until the legislative process is announced before we get on with our advocacy. Campaigning is often about building momentum, and the MPs who are going to vote at some point on the government's proposal need to be aware now that there's public support for effective UK aid spending. As I said, Results is concerned about some particular areas of aid spending that could be at risk, and I'm looking forward to hearing later on in this call to what extent others in the field share our concerns. At present, we hear that decisions are being made in closed rooms by senior ministers, advisors, and civil servants, and there's a lot of concern that the process isn't transparent. If they're going to make cuts, then it's really important to know what the criteria they're using for making them, to enable us to assess and, as necessary, challenge proposals on the basis of the impact that they will have on poverty reduction and on people living in developing countries, which is or should be the basic reason for all of our aid spending. Some of you who've been campaigning for us for a while will have worked out that we're particularly concerned about risk to nutrition programming. We've previously shared that the UK's financial commitments to nutrition ran out at the end of last year. We simply don't know whether the government intends to keep spending on programs that fight malnutrition. And as you know, good nutrition is vital not only to health, but also to one's ability to benefit from an education and live a successful life. We're also concerned that commitments to vaccination are not watered down. The government made a huge and critically important financial commitment to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, just last year. But will this be honoured in full? We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has massively disrupted vaccination programs around the world, and in particular, efforts to eradicate polio, for which additional funding is needed. We're concerned that the money needs to be there to fund the government's stated commitment to education, particularly since the Global Partnership for Education needs financial contributions from donors this year, and the UK needs to stump up its share. As the host of the conference, we reckon it needs to be giving around £600 million over the replenishment period of 5 years. And we're also worried that the government could cut our progress on diseases such as tuberculosis, where we're already way behind on meeting the global targets that world leaders committed themselves to over many years, most recently in 2018. And of course, we're now falling further behind as a result of COVID-19, another airborne infectious deadly disease. Without new diagnostics, vaccines, and treatments, we're simply not going to make sufficient progress in the fight against what was, until the COVID pandemic, the world's deadliest infectious disease, and which is still killing 1.5 million people every year. So on that sober note, before I introduce our speaker for the evening, I'll hand over to Ruthie for the usual roundup of all your critically important activities around the UK, stuff you've been doing in the last month. Over to you, Ruthie.
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, everyone. For those who haven't virtually met me yet, I'm Ruthie, the new campaigns coordinator. And as Aaron said, there's a lot of things at the moment to be concerned about, but also there's a lot of ways that we as campaigners can and will make a positive difference. So among results campaigners, it's already been a busy start to the year. In the last month, groups have been busy planning the months ahead and thinking about 2021 campaigning. To highlight a few examples, Edinburgh and London had a joint planning meeting in January, which went really well. Stork Valley had a Zoom meeting, and I'm going to quickly share the photo because I think it's lovely that we're capturing our life on Zoom at the moment. So this is Stork Valley in their planning meeting. Hello, everyone. And Brighton also had a planning meeting and have made a spreadsheet, which looks very organised for the year ahead. I'm going to quickly hand over to Carrie from the Birmingham group to briefly tell us about how the Birmingham planning went and what the group are planning to work on over the coming months. So Carrie, if you're there, would you like to step in?
Evening, everyone. Just a quick 2 minutes from the Birmingham group. We had a little planning meeting last week, and tonight we had, just before the national call, we had a Birmingham catch-up intro call. We're quite a small group, but we want to grow. So we had some new people on the call, which was lovely. We just introduced each other. We've agreed to have a mid-month catch-up meeting as well to see how our actions are going. We made some definite plans to work on this action in February to target our MPs. We're finding out about our MPs together. There were 6 of us on the call, which was a great start. And we've also asked our group to also attend. We're going to be sending out invitations to the Eventbrite training dates, so people can get learn about the wider issues of what SALT's work. So that's it really. We have a few sort of housekeeping and stuff to catch up with, but that's an ongoing thing. So it's a good start to the year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie. And I'm now going to share, so we sent out the action materials for the February action. And you might have noticed that we also have a background sheet too, which is a flow chart that helps to guide engagement with your MP. So it might be that it helps to think about what the next step might be. And there's also actions in bold which might be useful to take again for the first time or repeat nearer the vote. So I just wanted to highlight that that is a new resource available. And the AID campaign and the AID Coalition on the UK AID campaign have also produced a bill campaign toolkit, which we'll share in the chat, and that also includes a lot of tips and guidance on engaging with your MP. There's a template script for phone calls and also some case studies you can use. And in addition to the toolkit, the AID Coalition have a series of training events. As Carrie mentioned, they're coming up in February. The first one was yesterday. It was a kickstart session, and that will be repeated next week, Wednesday, the 10th of February at 7:30 p.m. And it's a really good opportunity to hear about the importance of AID, tips for how to campaign on the issue, and also be connected to campaigners from different organisations who, like you, care about protecting UK aid spending. And last night there were 100 attendees, which was really cool. And I recommend signing up to the event next Wednesday, whether you're planning to go or not, just because that's a way to make sure you get the email updates, resources and recordings, and also information on future training sessions, which will cover tips for engaging with your MP, local media tips for local media coverage, and also using social media. And some of the network have already engaged with their MPs this year on UK aid. In Stork Valley, 3 MPs have been contacted by members to give them the heads up on our concerns for this year, including cuts to aid. And Jill has also kindly made a roundup of the media that has been written. So I'll share that in the chat so that you can read the group's letters and articles and think maybe that's something you might want to do. And Meryl from Edinburgh has been in touch with her MP, Ian Murray, and I believe this was her first letter to her MP on the issue, and it was sent on World Education Day. So I'm going to share that letter and also hand over to Meryl to briefly hear about how she found the process of writing to her MP. So Meryl, if you're there.
Hi guys, I'm Meryl. I'm a new member of the Edinburgh Results team. I recently just joined last month, and I joined my first conference call, and I wrote my first email to my MP. Ruthie's just kindly asked me to briefly talk about it, and I'm sure you're all pro at writing emails, but those who are at the same boat as me, I really encourage you to do so. It's quite nerve-wracking at first, but there's a lot of resources in the Results UK website, and there's a lot of support from other group members. So Lucy, who's my team leader, she's not with us tonight, but she's helped me a lot with my email, kind of just giving me suggestions and what to write on it. And just yesterday, I got an email back from Ian Murray, who's the MP for my constituency, and he said that him and his other Labour colleagues will be kind of pushing the government to put the UK aid back to 0.7% of the national income, and he will be voting against the UK aid cuts. So it's a small victory for us.
Thank you so much, Meryl. That's really great to hear. And I'm going to move swiftly on because I don't want to talk too much. But I'm just going to highlight the survey that we sent out in Newsflash. So this is a survey which, as you see, is fairly straightforward and hopefully will only take about 10 minutes. And it's basically just going to help us in planning as a grassroots team how we can support you as campaigners and also the network. So thank you to everyone who's already completed that. And if you haven't, please, we would really appreciate it if you do. So yeah, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing what we all get up to in February, and I'm going to hand back to Aaron.
Thanks so much, Ruthie. That is actually my favourite part of the call, hearing all the stuff you guys have been up to. It really is the highlight of my month, actually. Fills me with a lot of energy to keep doing this work, so thank you so much for that. Let's jump into the topic of tonight's call, which is to delve into the potential impacts of a cut in UK aid from 0.7 to 0.5% of our national income. It's my real great pleasure to introduce you to an expert on this issue, our guest speaker tonight, Ian Mitchell. I've said he's joined earlier, so I'll just belt on and introduce him. We're really privileged to have an economist here on the call to help us unpack some of the claims and concerns that are being made around the potential cuts. Ian Mitchell is a senior fellow and the Director of Development Cooperation in Europe at the Centre for Global Development, or CGD. Now, he leads CGD's work in Europe on how governments' policies accelerate or inhibit development and poverty reduction. He considers both the effectiveness of aid and policies beyond aid, including trade, migration, environment, and security. He's also an associate fellow at Chatham House, and his Twitter handle, if you'd like to follow him, and I think you should, is @econmitch, and we're going to drop that in the chat in just a second. Ian, a very warm welcome to you. Thanks so much for giving up part of your evening to come and join us. On the call, as you've heard, we've got volunteer campaigners from all around the UK, some with loads of experience of advocacy on international development issues, others who are brand new and just getting into action maybe for the first time, but everyone here is keen to do their bit to help maintain effective UK aid spending. We're going to start, as always, by asking a few opening questions, which we've shared with our speaker in advance. And after that, we'll open the discussion for anyone who wants to ask a question. But before we get into the details of that, Ian, could you just introduce yourself to people on the call and also share with us just a brief outline of your role at CGD, the Centre for Global Development? And lastly, the most important question, what is it that motivates you as an economist working in the field of international development? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What puts a smile on your face when you walk into the office?
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for those very kind introductory words, Aaron. Yeah, so I work at the Centre for Global Development, which is a think tank. So we're funded by governments and charities to do research with the ultimate aim of improving policy to help the poorest people in the world. And my particular role is, it's kind of divided between comparing countries and what they're doing. Aid is the obvious one, but things like trade also matter, and obviously climate policy matters. So I do a lot of comparison work between countries. And I also have a particular focus on the UK. So we look in more detail at the UK's policies and partly the volume of aid, which unfortunately we're talking about today, but also what the aid gets used on and how effectively it's targeted, whether it reaches the poorest countries, whether it's giving in programs that are making the most difference, or whether there's room for improvement. So that's my kind of research agenda. And what gets me, so I mean, I studied economics at university, and I think perhaps once you start to realise how wide the inequality is in the world economically, I think a few economists have said, it's hard to focus on anything else if spreading prosperity is everything to people's life chances and health and well-being. So that's what drew me to it. So I started in consultancy and government, but then over time I realised I wanted to work on development issues, try and find better ways to design policy to help the rest of the world enjoy some of the things that we do, at least.
Thanks, Ian. That's great. It's great to hear your motivation there. I think many of us do this work for very, very similar reasons. So we're really, really pleased to have you. Look, let's jump straight into our pre-arranged questions before we open up to the floor. We will get to those questions. So by all means, put questions in the chat as we go. You may have some already, but please feel free, and I'll manage those at the end. We are also going to take questions by text message for those of you that are on the phones or can't reach the computer keyboard and want to text them in. The number tonight is 0777 56 111 78. That's 0777 56 111 78. And I'll say that again before we go to the questions. And we'll also do the unmute and shout out at the appropriate moment. But let's go to our first pre-prepared question, which is coming from Stort Valley.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us tonight, Ian. So our question is the government has argued that it needs to cut £4 billion from the aid budget for economic reasons. Would you say that this is true?
Great, thanks, Sean. No, I don't think it is. I mean, I think it's a policy choice that the government has taken. I think certainly it's borrowed a lot of money to enable its response to COVID, but I think there's probably three reasons why you can tell it's a policy choice. I mean, one is they're not cutting anything else substantially, really. Two is that because of the way the government borrows money, that the cost of borrowing, even though debt has gone up a lot. The cost of borrowing has actually gone down this year. So we're paying less interest on our borrowing this year than we were last year. And I guess the other factor is that even though 4 or 5 billion pounds is a huge amount of money in aid terms, and to anyone in the UK, relative to the amount of debt that we have and that any economy has, is pretty small. So we did some calculations and said, well, look, if you made this cut, this to 0.5%, and you maintain that cut for 5 years, how much would you save, and how would that affect the UK's debt? And the answer is it would reduce it by less than 1%. So, it's by no means a game changer on the overall levels of UK debt. So I think all of that, makes the case this is a policy choice, and the government's just decided that this is less important to it than almost every other area of spend, I guess.
The numbers don't seem to lie there, Ian. It seems pretty clear. Thanks for that very, very helpful answer. Are we going to go over to Sheffield for our second question now?
Yep. Hi, Ian. Yeah, so we're told that the precise cuts to be made to aid programmes haven't yet been made public. So how can we tell what the impact will be on poverty reduction?
Hi, Nicole. Thank you. Yeah, good question. I mean, it's extremely difficult to scrutinise what the government's doing. The Foreign Secretary made one or two of the Czech decisions clear last week to Parliament, but at a very high level. So, for example, some of the cross-government funds have been cut. But within the Foreign Office budget, we still don't know what the plan is. We did some analysis to get an idea. I heard Aaron mention earlier that some of the kind of announcements on nutrition have expired, and there aren't any new ones, but there are some other commitments that are in place, so we know about. So some of those are kind of formal commitments. So we still contribute about £1 billion a year into the EU's aid budget. We haven't got any scope to reduce that. The government's also made clear that its climate commitments will be maintained. And if you add up all of those commitments that were already made, which include transfers to the World Bank and so on, then what it suggests is that the bilateral aid budget, which is the money that the government gives directly to low-income countries, we think will need to be cut by at least half. So for programmes that are funded in country, which includes nutrition and vaccination programmes, that will take a very substantial hit to preserve the other things the government has announced, especially on climate. So we know that. The other thing that we did was we looked back at when the government last had a 10 billion aid budget. That's what will be left after these reductions. And we said, well, if the government goes back to that, what will that mean? And some of the impacts on that were that I think it was 1.2 billion less going to the least developed countries. So those are the very poorest and the most fragile. And humanitarian aid would also take a cut. The final thing we did, we took the government's own figures on its results. It publishes this 5-year results summary and says, we reached this many people in terms of our education, and we vaccinated this many people. So if you take those results claims, and some of those I would take with a pinch of salt, but if you take them at face value and say, well, let's reduce those by 30%, what kind of impacts would we see on an annual basis? So you'd see 4.5 million fewer people supported to get a decent education. You'd see 3.6 million fewer people supported to have access to clean water and sanitation. Probably the one that Aaron hinted at earlier was, which I think is really important, is the immunisation and against preventable diseases, where it would mean 5 million fewer people getting vaccinated, and the knock-on impact of that would be that 100,000 fewer lives would be saved, or 100,000 lives would not be saved. So there's a few more. I could list off other things. Those are a selection of the things, but I think they give you a flavour of the magnitude of good that aid can do, and what's likely to be lost, even if the government isn't telling us exactly what it plans to stop doing.
Yeah, and on that, can I just ask a follow-up question? You listed quite a few different impacts there. That's not if they put all the cuts in one place, this would be the damage. If they put the cuts somewhere else, this would be different damage. This is and damage. Like all of these things would happen in general, right? That's the way.
Exactly. Exactly. So maybe they'll protect the education budget. Certainly, the Foreign Secretary has said that in words. Although, what does protect mean? But then, if he did, then the nutrition impacts or the immunisation and life saves impact would then need to take a bigger hit. Is the upshot. So exactly, Aaron.
Right. So all of the bad news comes all at once. It's not really a pick and choose on that. Wow. Yeah. Very, very tough stuff. Let's go to our third question. I see lots of stuff popping up in the chat. We'll circle back around to all of those for sure. Now our third question, if I'm not mistaken, is going to come from Edinburgh.
Hi, Ian. So the government has said it will return aid spending to 0.7% of national income when it's fiscally prudent to do so. Is that likely to be soon?
Great, thanks, Meryl. Great question. So, yeah, it said the language it used was when fiscal circumstances allow. So the Chancellor hasn't explained what he might mean by that. I don't know if he will. I think there's probably a couple of ways there's probably three ways to interpret that. You could say, well, maybe when the economy gets back to where it was in 2019, the government will return the aid budget. I should say, if you take it at face value, I'll come back to whether that's right. But that probably the economy will get back to its size in 2019 at some point in 2022. So that would be relatively soon. The government uses a measure called the current budget deficit, which basically looks at how much it's borrowing every year. Aside from investment, it just looks at spending, how much it's borrowing for that. So we think that measure would probably get back to 2019 figure in about 5 years' time. I think if the Chancellor judges it in terms of debt levels, so I mentioned earlier that the debt can be measured against how much the economy produces in a year, so as a proportion of the economy's output, how much is debt. That's shot up hugely over the pandemic. I think if that's the metric, then it will probably be more than a decade before, possibly decades. But the Foreign Secretary also spoke to Parliament the other day, and I mean it's pretty clear that they're not going to pin themselves to a figure on this. I think they're going to leave it to their judgment. And I guess my assessment is I'm not sure they do plan. They're certainly not in this Parliament. I'd be extremely surprised. Return to this, and I honestly think I'm not sure that they intend to.
Thanks, Ian. So 3 different economic tests, none of which they would commit to, but given that it's highly likely that the analysis seems to indicate that this is a policy and political decision rather than a purely economics-driven one, that the chance of them moving back to 0.7 in this Parliament is basically 0, unless we can do something about that through campaigning and advocacy work. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, no, I think that is right. And I just picked up Corinne's comment in the box I can answer immediately, which is on those are annual impacts. I can share the link to our analysis of those. I think, I mean, maybe these sort of takes you into perhaps more into advocacy than the sort of economics of it. I think some other points that are interesting is we looked at, I mean, nearly every manifesto, nearly all of the MPs were elected on a manifesto of 0.7%. I'm sure you'll be using that in your analysis. And you know that was only 14 months ago, or maybe 15 months ago now that those manifestos were written. So I think it's disappointing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're very disappointed. So let's thanks for that summary. We've got a good 25 minutes to talk this through. I think it's not often we have an economist on the call, so I think hopefully there'll be some really interesting questions for you to answer. Let's jump across to the chat. I think we've sort of answered a couple. So Deirdre from Poole, I think the language you used originally in was a policy choice, and what you and just to confirm that what you really meant by that was that this is a decision taken by the politicians based on what they wanted to do. and not based on some sort of other criteria that they had set out in advance.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the political point is a good one. Perhaps worth a brief comment on that. We were hearing some survey evidence today in the office about public support for aid. I mean, I think the government is, thinks it will get political points for this from certain sections, but I also think, there's a lot of support for the aid budget, and it was interesting hearing you, Aaron. I think it does make a difference to MPs. I think they will be, whether they vote for this or against it when it comes to Parliament probably will depend on the size of their mailbox and how much heat they're getting from their constituents. So I do think that makes a big difference. And I think, again, Aaron, you might know better than me on this, but if you talk, one of the reasons I think the government has put off the vote is because it's worried about losing it. I think if it thought it could roll it through, it would have done it at the end of January, and that was certainly the rumours we heard before Christmas. So I think they've been surprised by the degree of pushback.
Yeah, we are a long way from counting any chickens, a very long way, but we are hearing encouraging signs about levels of support for aid in Parliament. We're far from out of the woods on this one, but it's definitely something that is worth the fight. That is very clear. We have a good shot. All right, let's go to Jill's question because it's on the same topic, and then we'll come back to Cameron's question. So Jill put in the chat, she says, two of us have a Tory MPs on the Finance Committee and is very interested in trade and aid. Is there any economic arguments against cutting aid, i.e. the effect on trade and business?
So I think pretty limited. I mean, I think the long-term argument holds up. That if you think right back to after the Second World War and the US helped Europe with the Marshall Plan, which was actually, even though a lot of people talk about the Marshall Plan in most people's minds is about financial support, actually it was a lot to do with trade and opening up trade routes with the US, and that played a major role in Europe's development. So in the long term, clearly it's in the US's interest to have had Europe develop and become, a powerful, democratic, socially democratic continent, if you like. So I think there's that long-term case, but I think the benefits to the UK directly from trade in relation to the aid we give out, I think, are extremely small. And so I think that argument does work for certain Conservatives. MP hold the view that this is benefiting our companies, but I think it's a pretty marginal argument, and I think it's not one that particularly appeals to people, actually, in my experience.
Thanks, Ian. I've read similar research that for certain parliamentarians of a particular political persuasion, those can be very persuasive arguments, but the evidence is limited, and the general public is much more inspired by the moral set of arguments that we can bring to bear on the subject of aid. Let's jump back to Cameron's question. Hopefully I'm going to pronounce this correctly. The Dasgupta review that just came out has strongly suggested the need to integrate climate and nature into economics for policymaking and to move away from raw GDP. As an economist, do you think the environment's already better integrated into the development and aid thinking than in the way that we approach it in domestic policymaking?
That's an extremely good question. I used to work at the Environment Department in the UK, so I should probably know the answer to this. It's somewhat integrated, you're right, into the development thinking. So lower income countries depend much more on their agriculture and biodiversity than we do. I think if I was being glib, you could say that, we destroyed our biodiversity, quite some time ago in the UK, and there's not a huge amount of it left. I think the serious point when it comes to development is what I see a lot is climate change is being driven by emissions, a lot of which are in China and emerging economies. That's true. And then the leap is made that we should be, expecting using our development and aid budget to promote environmental, good, sustainable futures for low-income countries. And I think sometimes the leap that's made there is sometimes forget that in the UK we emit 7 tons per head of greenhouse gases, and the 50 poorest countries at the moment they emit less than half a ton per head. So I think it definitely makes sense to support those countries in a way that's going to put them on a sustainable pathway. What it doesn't make sense to do is to say, well, we'll only give you your aid if you stop using coal tomorrow, when, as we've seen, the UK government is still approving coal projects. And I think there's a real temptation for politicians to make climate change a problem over there that we're going to solve with our aid budgets, and it does undermine effectiveness. So you've touched on a sort of current topic for me. I think there's a risk that with the government's rush to embrace climate, that it's undermining some of its aid effectiveness, and people will be worse off as a result. Although, of course, the overall issue is absolutely right. And the Dasgupta review is brilliant. I mean, economists don't, we value the environment. And that, you wouldn't, as an economist, you wouldn't really have a job if markets worked perfectly. So I completely subscribe to everything in Dasgupta and what he says, because it's right. We should be valuing that in our decisions.
Great, thank you. And Cameron, would you mind rustling us up a link to Dasgupta? It sounds like there could be some extra reading for somebody to take a look at. That would be great if you could drop that in the chat. And Ricky's also made a comment. Paul Collier, Plundered Planet, makes the point that tackling climate change and tackling poverty are mutually necessary. And I think, sneak preview, I think you're going to see some broad public campaigning on exactly the integration of people and planet across the summer. Quite a number of the large UK development agencies have pulled together some big public campaigning on exactly that, and we'll be looping you all in at the appropriate moment on all of that stuff. So it's good to see those linkages being explored and recognised. They're really important, and particularly given the overlap between the aid budget and what's being spent on climate and our commitments around the UNFCCC in Glasgow later this year. Does anybody else, we're going to go to the phones or to people that would like to unmute and ask a question. We've still got a good 15 minutes to go, so plenty of time to get into it. Does anybody want to just unmute and then just ask out a question? You're advocates, you don't have to be shy.
I'm worried someone's going to put their hand up and say, the thing I've never understood about economics is, and then I won't be able to answer it.
Well, I mean, I've got one then. I'll use, oh, no, wait, somebody just unmuted. Who was that?
Mark from Norwich here.
Go ahead, Mark.
Hi there, was it? I just wanted to ask a question. Could we use our own tax returns to campaign on? Because like each year we generate our own tax, and you get a form to say how it's actually spent. There's like a little pie chart, and always overseas aid is always the lowest contribution on there. For me, it sort of translates into about probably about between £65 and £70 a year, which translates into what, £1.30 a week, which, considering the work that it does and the impact it has, is, an incredible value. That's sort of basically buying a newspaper, isn't it? So is that something that we could use?
There's definitely, I do that calculation from time to time. You divide the 15 billion or the 10 billion by 60 million people in the country, or maybe you cut out children or something. And as you say, it becomes a very reasonable amount of money that the average person's contributing. So Aaron will know whether that works as a campaigning tool. Personally, I find it powerful. I guess the other thing I'd say was I find it interesting that I sometimes think the 0.7% confuses people. I think if it was 1%, everyone can see that it's not a huge chunk of our money. But in some way, the 0.7 becomes kind of difficult to process, and people focus on the 15 billion instead. But less than 1%, I think is not a lot to contribute. One final comment, actually, Aaron. One other thing to bring in on a more sensitive topic. The other thing, perhaps that might be worth drawing attention to MPs is, so when we left the EU, we used to send quite a bit of money to the EU, and it was spent inside Europe, mainly in Southern and Eastern Europe. And that spending was very substantial. It was £6 billion per year that went on that. So as part of leaving the EU, we've already substantially reduced our overseas spending. I wouldn't make a case for us to carry on with that spending. But I think it's interesting, as the government says, we're going to be a global Britain and we're going to focus on the world other than the EU. It saves the money that we used to spend through the EU, and then it also cuts the money that we spend internationally elsewhere as well. I think there's a point there about the authenticity of global Britain, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually really powerful. Was that 6 billion per year? Was that's just the inside Europe? What's the correct terminology? I'm trying to remember it. Like the not development funds, but
yeah, regional development, exactly. So we did a piece of analysis where we took off the money that comes back. Obviously, didn't count that, and then we took off some of the money that went to supporting the Commission, if you like, and then what's left, we calculate how much actually went to other countries in the EU. A lot goes to Poland. Some lesser amounts go to Greece and other countries like that. So I think that's in the link that was sent, but I'll put it on there afterwards as well.
That's great. Yeah, I think Naveed posted that in the chat quite early on. It's a really powerful article, and I do recommend people do read it. We'll paste it again before the call is over. I've been telling everybody, if you want to read one thing about the aid cuts to get all of the numbers, go read that article. It's just we're really, really pleased you're able to come tonight and speak to it. It's really, really powerful. And on the subject of looking at your own personal tax return, and if you're lucky enough to make one every year, seeing the numbers come back, and looking at those numbers and being able to say, yeah, this is affordable for me. I'm proud of that spend. I say go for it. I think there's everything that you can do to make things real for people, to put things in perspective for people, to remind them that actually on an individual level, it isn't actually all that much money. Is really, really important, because the thing is that £5 billion or 15 billion pounds or whatever, I mean, that's a nonsense amount of money. Nobody knows how much that really is or what it really does. That's why we have economists. They figure out that sort of stuff. But for ordinary people, you just have, it's so impossible to imagine what that really, really is. And so being able to bring that back and put it in perspective by something as real as, this is what my tax bill looked like, and here's the tiniest slice compared to all the other things we spend money on that goes on aid. I think that can be potentially very powerful when you're able to share it in the right way with your MP. One thing that I always like to remind people of is that we do tend to focus a lot on 0.7, the money we spend abroad. But that does mean that 99.3% of the money we're spending on ourselves. That's an awful lot of money that we're spending on ourselves. And I think, if you look at your own life and how, I imagine we're all pretty generous people with friends and family and loved ones and people in our community in terms of the things that we would want to give away in terms of time and energy and gifts and so on. 99.3% spent on ourselves seems like a reasonably defensible figure in the scheme of things.
Aaron, I've got a question.
Please go ahead.
Deirdre from Poole. Actually, it's a comment as well and a question. The comment is, in the Poole group, we developed a little game to try to help people understand what 0.7 looked like, and it was very successful. We had £1's worth of penny coins, which we spread out, and then we asked people what they thought 0.7 looked like. And one of the coins we'd actually painted on the back of it 0.7. And it was really astonishing how much people thought 0.7 was. They thought it was 7 pence or whatever. And if we could show that it was actually less than 1 penny, it started to focus people's minds. But the other thing I wanted to say is I'm just still very baffled about why this has come up now. If you look at what Vicky has posted about the words of the Conservative Manifesto, what is going on?
I'm not sure I can say exactly what I want to say, because this is a family video and swearing's not allowed. Ian, I'm gonna let you have a stab at that. But I think, yeah.
I love the imagery. It'd be great to do a photo of that, to have like the 99 coins and then 2/3 of one painted white or something. That would be cool.
Ian, sorry to interrupt, but if you look in the chat, Della's put a picture on it. Sorry, she's put an image there of the activity. Sorry.
No, I mean, I'm with Aaron. I think it's been used as an excuse. For a long time, the government has wanted to spend more on security, and in the last spending round, actually, maybe this is part of the answer to can it afford it. It increased its spending on defence by about the same amount that it reduced it on aid. In fact, it was a bit higher, actually, and so I think that's what's motivated this change in a way, is to put more on security. The UK spends a lot on security relative to other countries, so we also look at this in the note. So that's also one of these things that's measured against GDP or against the economy. And NATO has a target of 2%, and you might remember the US spends ridiculous, like 3.5%, and everyone else in the world basically spends less than 2%, except for us. And the US are putting pressure on other countries to spend more, and we've now, I can't remember exactly the figure now, I think it will go up to something like 2.4 from 2.1 or something like that. But yeah, of course, it's almost the same as the 0.2 reduction. So that's what's behind it. But I think, as you say, whether the government feels that this is a political vote winner, I'm not sure.
It's Caroline from Birmingham. Just a bit of background. My MP used to be Gisela Stewart, and I remember talking to her before 2016, and she was talking about Boris, because he was Foreign Secretary, wasn't he? He wanted to merge the aid and the Foreign Office all back then, and they just didn't have the focus to do it at the time. But she told me that's what he was going to do, and then it was all, she intimated it was something to do with the defence type of tidying up all the mess we've made in Afghanistan and all this horrific cost of all these campaigns. So that's just something that my MP told me all that time ago.
I sometimes think it'd be great if we had the scrutiny on the defence budget that we had on the aid budget. If you had the Daily Mail crawling all over the money we spend on defence and what we do with procurement, I'm sure you'd have plenty of stories. But,
Thanks, Ian. So I just want to, we're coming up to the last 5 or so minutes. So if you've got any more questions for Ian, do get them ready. Just I want to flag a couple of comments from Vicky in the chat. I think, because I think this is important for our advocacy and our campaigning, and the reason why what we're about to do over the next few weeks is so critically important. The first thing that Vicky says is they know that at times like this, a chunk of the public will respond that we need to look after ourselves right now. And I think, that's a very human reaction. And I think we need to be really careful if we come up against people that are saying those kinds of things to really meet them where they are. There are people whose lives have been upended over the last couple of years who are really hurting, who may have lost loved ones, who may have lost jobs and all the rest of it. So I think we need to be really sensitive around those kind of arguments. I keep coming back to David Cameron, back when he made his first Gavi pledge many years ago. He said, some people think that we can't afford to spend so much money on aid. He said, and that we should spend the money at home instead. He said, I say that we are a rich country. We do not have to choose. We can do both. And I think that really stuck with me. And if you look at the economic numbers that Ian's been talking about, I think everything that Cameron said back when he first pledged to Gavi still holds true, despite the overall damage to the economy that we've seen. I think secondly, Vicky's point that even though times like these are exactly when we need to look after everyone, no one is safe till we're all safe in a pandemic. I think, that is absolutely, absolutely true. And without sort of scaremongering or making, COVID any more worse than it actually is, we've seen how quickly it can spread. We've seen how quickly it can mutate. We've seen the fact that you need a strong health system like the NHS to be able to fight it, to get diagnostics up and running, to get vaccination program rolled out. Our aid budget is what does that and what helps support that in some of the poorest countries in the world. And if we want to be able to become a global truly global Britain, and to be able to trade and travel and play our role in the world, we need to make the world a safer place overall, and to help countries to do that for themselves. And you know, like it or not, our aid budget is a fabulously effective way of doing that. When we look at some of the things that we work on, particularly in health as it relates to COVID, but across the board with education and others. So just thanks for putting that in the chat, Vicky. I think that's really, really powerful to remind folks of us. I'm going to go through to Jamil and Jill's questions. We'll take them both at once to give Ian a chance to squeeze them in before the wire. If the UK as a global leader in foreign aid makes cuts that go ahead, would it give other countries the green light to follow suit? And if so, is there a rough way to cost the impact of our negative leadership? And then Jill's question following on, where does this fit with the meetings happening this year, e.g. the G7 and COP26?
Great. Yeah, they're excellent questions. So I think you're right on the point about the UK being a global leader and influencing other people's aid budgets. So actually, France and Germany have both increased the amount of aid they're giving in 2021 in response to the pandemic. And that comes back to what perhaps the other argument I would use in relation to Vicky's question is, you know, we've been able to borrow our way out of this, but low-income countries haven't got that possibility, and that's the asymmetry and why it's more important than ever. I don't think it's probably possible to cost how much extra the UK has encouraged, if you like, with its commitment to 0.7, but I think it has, and I think it's just at a moment when France and Germany are getting close. It's a shame. It's a real shame that the UK is stepping back now. I think it would be politically easier for all of those countries to defend, to say, well, you know, we all need to do this and we're doing it collectively. So I do think there's a knock-on, exactly as you say. I think the G7 and COP question is fascinating. So there's a slightly boring point here on the COP where, I mean, the climate commitments are being protected, I think probably in their entirety, which is meaning that the other commitments are going to take bigger cuts. But the climate commitments, when they were set in 2009, and then they were endorsed in the Paris Agreement to provide extra climate finance, they were intended to be new and additional. If you'd have asked me 6 months ago that the UK has been a leader on that, other countries have, just overnight their projects have become climate projects, and they've started saying, oh, we're doing climate finance. And the UK's taken a great line on that and said, no, it's only new and additional money that will count. But now it's basically undermined that, because it's hollowed out. It's made the new 2 billion commitments on the climate, but it's taken that money effectively from the rest of the aid budget. So that won't be lost. I mean, the government's not putting that front and centre, but that will undermine its ability to make progress on the COP agreement. And you're right, and the same with the G7. I mean, it's not in as powerful a position to encourage other countries to step up anymore. It has undermined its leadership there. So I suppose, yeah, there's something just to be said. I do think if those countries had stepped up quicker, we might not now be in this position. But even so, I still think it's to fall behind those countries. We claim we're global Britain and we're chairing those things, I think is inconsistent.
Thanks, Ian. So we're right at the top of the hour. I'm afraid we do have to draw it to a close. Please don't go though, because I've got a few closing remarks, and I would love to get a photo from everybody. If you'd like to, at the end of the call, just pop your video on and wave. We'll do a photo. Ruthie's social media genius, wanting to make sure that we capture our time together this evening. But first, let me just finish wrapping up by saying a massive thank you to Ian. Ian, it's been so good to have you on the call and to have you able to bring your expert knowledge, your analysis, your candor. Really, really appreciate that. We're an advocacy organisation, and so we always need to ensure that the stuff that we're asking for, our policy analysis, all of that's based on the very best evidence that is out there. So we're really just so grateful that we can hear from experts such as you, so that we can act on that analysis. Ian, thanks so much. It's been great to have you. So to everybody else, if you can, please do take this month's action. If you've already taken action, please do put your thinking caps on, get creative, and think about how else you can spread the word or follow up if you haven't received a reply from things that you've done before. Everything you need, including links to training and toolkits, you can find either in the action materials, in our monthly news flash, which we sent out a couple of weeks ago. If for any reason you don't have them, just get in touch with our campaigns team, Naveed, Della, Ruthie, anybody. We'll make sure that you can get that and get some support to take action. If you want to mark your diaries, the next Grassroots conference call is going to be on the first Tuesday of the month, as it always is. So that's Tuesday, the 2nd of March. It's at the usual time of 8 p.m. And so lastly, I do want to close by thanking you all once again for your continued commitment to taking action in global poverty and to protect the UK's international development efforts. You'll see from the numbers that Ian has shared and the analysis in his article, it saves lives, it makes a massive difference in the world, and it's absolutely worth defending. So right before we go, want to say, see if we can get a big goodbye wave from everybody. Ruthie, do you want to count us down?
Yeah, I'm going to have to take 2 because there's so many of us, we go across to 2. So you might have to wait for a couple of seconds, but I am taking the photo. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Great, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ian, and thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and let's stop these cuts. Let's save a bunch of lives. Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Thank
Love
you.
you.
Bye.
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 Bye, everybody. Bye.